Morning, Amanda. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Good morning, Dawn.
So today we have Amanda Rajkumar with us. Amanda is Global Head of HR, People and Culture at Adidas. Prior to that, she spent 12 years BNP Paribas on their HR, and I believe you started in recruitment. Um, so she's got a lot of stuff to talk about, and she's got a lot of experience. She hails from London, and she's now living in Nuremberg in Germany. So maybe the first thing I want to say, I'm in North America, you're in Europe. We say Adidas. How do you say it?
Well, I say Adidas because I'm British and that's what we grew up with, but both pronunciations are accepted. So
Okay.
Adidas, obviously, North America is a huge part of our business. And so we're used to hearing it in many ways, so no problem.
Okay. All right. So let's jump right in. So we want to talk about recruitment. So are there any universal things that you look for when you're hiring, irrespective of the seniority of the position?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the first thing I would say is personality. I think
Mhm.
when in those first few moments of an interview, it can be nerves from the potential candidate, but I think it's really important that you try to get some of your personality through, trying to break the ice a little bit, and let that shine. And I think it's also important to show that you have a real interest in the position and the company. Those kind of basics, which sometimes we take for granted in the heat of an interview.
Good.
I also think it's really important to have, evidence of ambition as well. I mean, showing, the interviewer what it is you're really wanting to do. One of the things I find very interesting when I speak to prospective candidates or even employees, when I ask them about, where do they see themselves in 10 years' time? Many people haven't actually thought about that, and they kind of know what's probably ahead of them in the first 1 to 2 to 3 years, or maybe even 5 years. But that longer term perspective is something that I think is so important to have when you go into an interview, because it's not just about that job, but it's what's going to be after that job. And I think showing that you've planned that out in your head is something that's quite important to me.
Okay, good. Thank you. What, if anything, has someone ever done to kind of like knock your socks off during an interview process that you said hireable in right away?
Well, I think it does link back a little bit. If in that first 1 hour you're getting a really good feel for this individual, both personally and professionally, that makes a huge difference.
Mhm.
I mean that also is something that is a skill. It takes time to obviously answer questions, but also lace in a little bit about your own experiences, but also give you some of your personality and a bit of flair there. I think that's very important. But I think for me is probably when I was recruiting for a particular role, we had a case study, and during that meeting, I would then look at the actual case study, what the individual had said, what their thinking was, and when I gave the feedback, I said, look, this is where I thought was great. This is where I think I would have liked to have heard a little bit more. They actually then decided to give me their reasoning why they thought their case study was better, in a very grounded and I would say balanced way. And it did make me think, wow, okay, I see a very different side of this individual. And that's where I say bringing more of yourself than just the standard responses to the questions, I think really makes a mark on the interviewer.
Right. And that's actually risky because some people can't do that balance because they're giving you feedback and you don't want them to sound arrogant.
Absolutely. So you've got to temper it, of course, and it also
Absolutely.
also depends on the moment, the individual, the role, etc. But
Mhm.
that was definitely a moment. I think that another thing that's coming to mind is when someone knew everything about my background. They'd done a complete presse study of everything I did from when I started, and um, uh, hopefully I'm back. I think I just stopped for a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, it was quite fun as well.
Uh-huh. Okay. Is there any kind of salary negotiations that turn you off or work that you want to share?
Um, no, I think it's very important for individuals to be able to negotiate themselves. It's extremely important. If you can't negotiate for yourself, who on earth is going to? And of course, there are situations where you have headhunters and intermediaries, but I think it's very important to have that discussion directly with an organization. And you have to absolutely make sure your timing is right, because clearly from the onset, having a discussion about compensation is not appropriate. But I think as you get towards the end stages, when you know that potentially you are one of the individuals that they would go to hire, I think it's important to put your expectations down. Now, this is a minefield, because in certain jurisdictions, North America, for instance, you have no legal need to actually give any information around your salary because there's protection rights about it. At the same time, I do think in other locations, it's important to give your expectations, because what you don't want is to be going down a process and then be completely offline when it comes to the offer. So I think I would say transparency at the right time, but also a clear set of expectations.
Perfect. And what's the best recruitment advice you want to give, and why?
So I would say I think it's 100% important to be authentic, to be yourself. Go in and be yourself, because you can't be anyone else. Right. And if you do put on a persona, or you're not able to be authentic in that moment, it will be found out eventually. And that's when you often have that mismatch of experience and what you see in the interview when the individual actually joins the organization. I think you can get around this by having a number of interviews. And what I tend to do is do a first kind of get to know chemistry, and then a much longer in-depth interview. Not career history, because I tend not to go by the CV. That's a very, I would say, established way of doing an interview. I tend to ask questions which will lead me into their background. But I tend not to do a chronological interview. That for me also is a little bit tedious, and I think also for the candidate. And I think it's important to ask questions that will allow them to showcase their skills, allow them to take a bit of extra miles on the question and demonstrate their own personal flair, but also at the same time giving them space to show who they are and let their individuality shine through.
Right. Anything that would make them an automatic no?
It's difficult, because I always try and keep an open mind, particularly in that very first chemistry meeting, when it's not based on factual questions, it's more just getting to know. And I think you can't blame people for maybe giving a bit too much information in those moments. I think if there were things that showed me this individual wasn't open in terms of mindset around diversity and equity, that would be a problem. It would certainly be something that would be a bit of a red flag to me. But I think other than that, I think everyone has opinions and views. I think as long as you're mindful in the way that you're placing them, I think that's okay. So nothing that would be, apart from that, an automatic no.
Sure. Any parting words you want to say, either to hiring managers or to the candidate that,
Yeah, I think for hiring managers, and having been currently one most of my career, I think it's really important to look at potential. Potential is something that's hard to gauge in interviews, and it's also hard to, even when we have employees, it's hard to really know someone's potential until you've got to know them over a period of time. So I think that is something that you need to give space in the interview to be able to get a feeling of their potential. And it's a hard one, because, as I say, you need to know somebody. But I try to not so much focus on degree, early experience. I try to think about, what are they doing now? What are the things that they're adding to their skill set in that current role, and what can they do, going forward? So that would be one thing. I think the second thing is knowing what I currently have in a team, trying to hire difference to it. Meaning, I don't want to bring the same person with the same kind of skills that I've got in the team, because that's what most hiring managers do. They're like, okay, I need this kind of finance person. Let's just say it's a finance control role. I need this kind of finance. They need to have this. And so we go and look for exactly that. But sometimes we actually need to find someone who's got different skills, who are going to add to the skills of that team. And I think that is something that I think is very important for hiring managers to consider and think about. Of course, now we have to talk about having diverse mindsets. We have to have different backgrounds, different. I'm not just even talking about race, sexuality, age difference. I'm actually talking about upbringing. I'm talking about where you went to study. If you did study, your social demographic background as well. Those things are very important, and having people from all walks of life, I think, truly makes the most diverse teams and the most successful teams. So that's a really important thing I think line managers often underestimate. We know there are so many biases in hiring, right, Dawn? So it is all about, okay, we want someone that looks like me or is English like me, potentially British. And you of course, you have these biases that come through. You immediately find an affinity and you're like, yeah, I like this person. You've got to make sure you're aware of that and be able to overcome that, I think. And I think that is something that you have to constantly think about as you're hiring. On the candidate side, I think, give it a go. I think even if you don't feel you're 100% qualified for the job, I think you absolutely need to give it a go and be daring and be bold, because if you don't ask, you don't get in life. That's what I've learned. And also, we know there is never anyone who's a perfect match for a role, but they can grow into it and they can show potential. And I think those are the two of the most important.
That's fantastic advice, Amanda. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure you're going to help a lot of hiring managers as well as candidates with some of the answers that you gave. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.